And welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Going for Two, presented by Home Field Apparel. I am your host, the publisher of the Extra Points newsletter, Matt Brown. I'm joined here by my friend and colleague, Bryan Fischer. Hey, holding up, man?
I'm doing well. Good to be back in the homestead after spending a week in Arizona and recovering from a few of those high temperatures and some schmoozing with a lot of ADs. But big week in college athletics, so it's not like any of that wheels kind of stops. We're still on it. We're still going around, and at least I'm doing it from the home office this time.
It is always good to be back. It's always good to get off the road. It's been like 90 today. This is like the first shorts day I think we've had of the year, which has been tremendous, right? Home office windows are open and everything. This is weird. I was actually talking with a couple of buddies of mine earlier today. I feel like this is the first time in my career when my phone has been blowing up off the hook to do radio in May. Normally, I am not a particularly popular radio host in May. The kind of nerdery that I want to do is generally not like the thing that everybody's talking about. But now, if everyone's doing an NIL segment, talking to somebody from our kind of extended universe would make a lot of sense. A major reason why I think maybe people outside of our orbit have had increased attention was a clarification from the NCAA earlier this week. I think this clarification was maybe hyped up to be something it wasn't ever going to be a couple of days ahead of time. But Bryan, please interrupt me if I am mistaken. But if I am reading the clarification and guidance correctly, the NCAA is now saying, listen, we want to remind you of our guidance that we issued 10 months ago that says that boosters should not be improperly influencing or providing undue inducements for athletes during the recruiting process. And these kind of deals need to be tied to something resembling fair market value. There needs to be documentation. And we're not going to, go after anybody unless it was absolutely egregious, but you're all on notice. And what everyone keeps asking me is, okay, Matt, now you've had a chance to think about this for a couple hours. What's your take? Are the NCAA cops coming? Is it impossible to enforce any of those rules? Is it still the wild? Every time I hear the word wild, wild west, I have an aneurysm because it's the same freaking thing in every single story.
We got to come up with a better synonym or
no. Well, please, right? I will give a free Extra Point subscription to somebody who gets a better term that we can actually get into the vernacular. If we can replace wild, wild west, I will give you a comp a sub, give you some stickers, whatever. And I have to be honest, and I don't know if this is just my brand or if me falling into paralysis by analysis or what, but Bryan, I don't have a great take. I feel like I have a couple of questions after reading this. I don't have a pithy 2-sentence takeaway. Do you? Maybe you're better at this than I am.
I can't distill it down to 2 sentences. I guess I mean, there's not really much to discuss. There's nothing really new about it. It's just really reaffirming that policies that they've kind of already had on the books, and really more of just serving notice to a lot of the schools. Like that's the biggest thing. It's like, hey guys, this is your warning shot, right? And while they have kind of said, maybe deals in the past, there might be some additional enforcement of some of those things, and maybe some additional looking into. The NCAA has already been doing that. The enforcement staff has been to schools. They've already questioned prospects and school compliance offices and whatnot. They've looked into a lot of these deals, and I think it's just really just trying to make sure that they stay busy and they are appearing to be on the up and up, and make sure that all the other schools are on the up and up too. Because frankly, it's a lot of schools just kind of saying, look over there. They are doing something, and we can't prove it, but you guys should really look into it. And so I think that's kind of what the board kind of is reaffirming, that, hey, we do have this investigative arm. We do have this enforcement arm that is supposed to regulate you guys. And so maybe it does scare a few people straight, but it does not seem like that. When you talk about the agents and the collectives and the people on that side of the business, they all think they've been following the rules, right? A lot of these collectives are started by lawyers, so they've already been like, we know we have been buttoned up and we have been following things. It's not going to affect us. So
some of them definitely think they've been following the rules,
right? There's always a gray area, right? And especially when things that need kind of some additional interpretation, and usually like when in normal NCAA processes, you'll have your bylaw, you'll create your proposals, you'll do all that stuff, and then sometimes there will be a test case that is kind of in that gray area, and you'll need an interpretation from the national office. And I think that's kind of what everybody kind of thought this would be. not really, just kind of reaffirming essentially what's kind of on the books. And we'll see if it ultimately results in anything. I think more than anything, I kind of mentioned this on Twitter kind of on Monday, is just like the things like the BYU Built Bar deal where there was a little bit of institutional involvement because, there was no clarity on some of that stuff that BYU folks thought they were within the rules. And I think that is definitely going to be thrown out the window. Anytime, a staffer gets involved in this, they're going to push it away and say, you know what, we just can't, which they typically have already been doing. But I think even more so that line of demarcation is going to be written in the sand there.
Some states now say you can do that. And that kind of trumps what, if in Tennessee, you can, right? I feel like I have maybe three takeaways. One, I know kind of similar, I think piggybacking of what you're saying here, regardless of what the policy actually says, I think it is reasonable to question the NCAA's administrative, investigative capacity. There's not that many investigators. They lost a bunch of them after COVID. The people that are there now, has not been the highest morale that the organizations ever had. And there's a little bit of gun shy. There's some element of being gun shy, right? So even if they have somebody dead to rights, I think it is reasonable to wonder if you haven't been able to do some easy stuff where you have people with subpoena power helped you for 4 or 5 years, and you got Gene Smith saying, we can't let this drag on for 3 years. We got to get things turned around in 6 months. I think it is reasonable to say, and I'm being generous here, prove it, because regardless of the rules, I don't think you have enough cops. I think that's one thing to think about here. Another thing, based on many of the conversations I have had with people in the collective world and people operating in this gray area world, there is a class of individual who, for the last several months, completely believes that there is the enforcement risk is 0%. And because it's 0%, they haven't even tried to launder any of this to make it seem like it's legitimate. The level of sloppiness in some of these contracts and some of the relationships with collectives, that I think if literally anybody in Indianapolis read them, would not stand up to any kind of scrutiny. And it's just people saying we don't care. I saw Darren Heitner said this on Twitter, and I actually think he has a point. Generally, the sports agents and marketing people that are the loudest quoted in these stories saying kiss my ass, NCAA, come get me, those are generally not the best agents. They're generally not the most experienced marketers. Some of those people have not passed the bar. They're not licensed. That is the hubris of youth. So that is just something to think about. They might be right. But there's a reason that the most institutional money people are not taunting Indianapolis. The last thing I think I will say on this, I think the collective sports media has erred a little bit in looking at Kavanaugh's concurring opinion and automatically assuming that now every single judge would find the exact same conclusion and that amateurism is dead. For one, it's a concurring opinion because everybody else didn't agree with it. And so that was him as one guy. We don't know what other district courts are going to say or appellate courts. We don't know how things work through the legal system. And the ability for the NCAA to say, we don't think a booster can be involved in this marketplace during this time, but can be involved in the marketplace at a different time, is a different legal question than can schools collude to limit compensation generally? And I know as soon as I say this, I know Andy Schwartz, I know 3 different economists are going to send me an email. Please do. I am just saying, having talked to lots and lots of people, I don't think we can with 1,000% certainty drag one case and apply it to every other little thing. We need courts and other judges to make that analysis for us. And that's what may happen down the road. But I don't think it's so open and shut that you could say absolutely that's what's going to happen.
I mean, even in that Alston case in particular, Judge Gorsuch, who wrote the opinion, he kind of said, there's nothing to prevent the NCAA to put in a no Lamborghini rule, right?
I've been thinking of that. Thank you. I was trying to think of which judge said that, right? And that was the exact thing. That's kind of what they're trying to do. I am not saying I think that is good and just. I'm not making a value judgment here. All I'm saying is, I think maybe some of my commentator brethren and definitely some of my industry brethren are treating all of this like it's already been settled in a way that I just don't think the facts line up with. I can't get on the radio and tell you, like, I think the NCAA shit's cooked. Like, I can't say that yet, because maybe it is, but I don't feel like I have that sense of certainty, you know?
Yeah, and I think the other thing to keep in mind, a good point about the enforcement. I mean, you look at the staff size itself. I mean, it's like probably less than half, based on some of the conversations that I've had, than it was a couple of years ago. And it's funny because as soon as we kind of went through all the rigmarole on Monday with this decision coming down, I just kind of really thought back to kind of that 2011, 2012, 2013 kind of era of the NCAA, where there was so much concern about third parties getting involved in recruiting, right? You had the Willie Lyles case that took a lot of precedence with Oregon. There was concerns about making sure that you had to certify your video services, your recruiting services, to make sure they were all on the up and up. And we're kind of back in square one with all that, right? The NCAA being very, very essentially kind of saying as part of their guidance that they'll have to make sure that some of these collectives, although they might have some good causes, are not booster organizations. So now you're going to go back into like certifying all these collectives to make sure they're not connected to the school, directly. Like they're getting into the weeds here with a lot of these things. And then look, I think the collective space is the one thing that everybody, if you go back and ask them, back in early June or whatever, before a lot of this, interim guidance, I guess they term it, was issued, like they probably would not have predicted the collective space getting this big, this quickly, and having this big of an impact on the market, right? And
yeah, I remember, I think we even talked about this in Slack a couple of months ago. I honestly thought, when like the first half dozen of these were founded, like, this kind of reminds me a little bit of the SPAC craze.
Yeah.
And all it needs is one regulatory change for half of these things to go out of business. And that might happen. We've already seen 2 collectives merge. But I did not expect the list from go to like 6 to 8 to 100 within 3 or 4 months. And the level of sophistication to grow as quickly as it did. Maybe that's because I'm a naive dum-dum, but I was surprised to see it grow as fast as it did.
Yeah, and I think that kind of caught everybody by surprise. It's understandable if we were maybe eventually going to get to this stage, but the fact that it's all happened, really since July, and the speed of these things ramping up. I mean, you're talking about a group of 5 programs, starting up collectives, and really designed to not only kind of stay competitive in the industry, but to kind of make sure that they can make some headwaters, against some of their bigger brethren in the FBS, and it's kind of filtering on down. And we probably shouldn't be surprised that when you crack the door open just a little bit in any kind of college sports, you knew somebody was going to kind of try to kick the door down and take advantage of that. So maybe there shouldn't have been that much surprise. I think everybody understood that, hey, look, a lot of car dealerships have relationships with schools. You figure that's going to end up, giving them trucks and cars and whatnot to athletes, and for social media posts. Everybody understood that. Everybody knew that some of the Olympic sport athletes in particular were going to have a really big opportunity on their hand, because they have great social media followings on TikTok and Instagram and all that. And that has helped, tremendously. But, I think the big dollar figures that frankly are very much unverified, outside of the athletic report that actually obtained one of the contracts, a lot of this is just kind of rumor and innuendo. And like I was talking with ADs last week, like they're like, you hear these things, and you got to talk about it with your staff. Like, hey, here's so-and-so making $8 million, or this guy was rumored to go for $3 million. And that has spread like a wildfire right now. And because it's not above the table, because these deals are not being sent to any kind of third-party clearinghouse, because a lot of the deals are not even being sent to the schools, nobody knows really what the market truly is.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because this is actually why Extra Points made that NIL recruitment rumor generator we published on Monday. And I was pretty proud of it personally. Andy Witchery helped write some of the copy. We paid a developer to help write the script. And beyond the fact that it was, it's Twitter bait and it produces things that are funny, I wanted to kind of poke fun at the idea that so much of the conventional wisdom about these deals it's only coming from recruiting message boards, dog avatar Twitter people, national sports talk radio people that don't have anything close to sourcing. And I think when you see a number, one, it gets multiplied in ridiculousness every couple of days, but often it's overstated by a factor of 2 or 3. If you see 3 million being thrown around somewhere, the actual total value is probably closer to 750,000. Now, granted, that's still a lot of money. That's more than you and I are probably ever going to make in a year, maybe 2 years, but it's not NFL wide receiver first round pick money. It's right, or like actual salary cap money. But you're right, because some of those message boards work in lockstep with the collective kinds of people and the folks that are spreading that money. You have to look into it. But the valuation tools that we have above the table and below the table are hilariously not up to the task of describing what's actually happening.
Yeah, I just want
Very
to
cool.
take a step back, because that was I know we discussed it, but my initial rumor generator that I did was I hear that Mark Emmert is trying to recruit athletes for UNLV with a signed Oscars worn Will Smith suit jacket. So I think that was like a perfect encapsulation.
Yeah, you heard it here. You heard it here first,
Mark
folks.
Emmert himself, dirty money involved.
Vegas bag man. Yeah. So in conclusion, this makes no sense. It can keep changing very quickly. I am not expecting the Indianapolis amateurism police to come raid the. I think my last prediction. I think I said this on the air, that we can kind of transition. If the amateurism police come and invade the offices of a collective, or try to break down the doors in any of this, I do not think they are coming after Aspire or Division Street or any of the most professionalized, most institutional money, big picture collectives. I think if they're going to make an example from somebody, they're going to go to one of these smaller capitalized, maybe fake 501c3 collectives, somebody, so maybe like the third biggest Florida State collective, or somebody that has thrown around enough money to get a headline, but is stupid enough to have not tried to do this with any level of sophistication or cared to try and make sure any of the forms were correct. And I'm telling you guys, those deals exist. I do not, and I think you might even be able to get some of those without immediately having a federal court lawsuit.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the feds, because I think that in talking with folks, that's the real, it's not the Keystone Cops of the NCAA enforcement that are going to come through and really make a dent in this industry. It's going to be the actual IRS. It's going to be, your FBI's. It's going to be, tax fraud. It's going to be stuff like that, that are really going to get these collectives, I think, kind of in a bind. And I think there's some that have, kind of declared their 501c3 status and made a big deal about that. But the IRS tomorrow could say, end up revoking that. And then you're faced with a whole set of different issues. And so I think getting buttoned up on that aspect is something that the collectives really need to be focusing on. Not necessarily the NCAA enforcement, not necessarily these rules. It's making sure that they're good with the government, because that is a much more powerful entity than what is coming out of Indianapolis. And you mentioned those contracts too. I think that is another thing that if I could have predicted something back in June or July, like the absolute first thing I would have said is somebody's going to get sued. We're going to have an Albert Means style drama, unfolding, because somebody didn't get something that they were promised. Somebody had an awful contract they want to get out of. We go back to the Zion Williamson case that's still working its way through court right now in terms of his marketing deals, that he signed. Like there's going to be some issues, I think, that will eventually lead to some lawsuits.
Yep, I completely agree. Though I will say this: there's several collectives right now that are advertising themselves as 501c3s. To the best of my knowledge, only Indiana, the Hoosier for Good, or whatever the Indiana is, the one that Fred Glass is running, I believe that's the only one that's actually gotten it. I know that the Ohio State one is saying that they've gotten it. I know that a couple other ones have said they've got it. There is a difference between the state registering you as a nonprofit and Uncle Sam saying you're a 501c3. They might have done it, and it's not on the IRS website yet. But listen, if you are somebody who's listened to 20 minutes of this podcast and gave money to any of these people, like, one, why? Two, save your receipts. One place where you don't have to save your receipts, because you know that buying something from there is not going to cause a potential IRS investigation, would be with our good friends and partners at Home Field Apparel. Rather than trafficking in money laundering through potentially bogus charities to help recruit 4-stars, Home Field Apparel instead makes really comfortable shirts. They're fun shirts that have lots of unique vintage collegiate apparel logos, stuff from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, things that your licensing department kind of forgot about until a bunch of weirdos in Indianapolis looked through the yearbook archives, found them, and stuck them on some t-shirts. I'm wearing one today. I'm wearing Rufus, the Ohio Bobcat. They just did a bunch of refreshes, and big new Saturday season 4 is about to start with Arkansas. So if you are a fan of Arkansas, if you are a fan of old-timey cartoon pigs, of the stuff from the heyday of Arkansas, from I don't know, the early 90s in basketball. Maybe there's I haven't seen the designs. Maybe there's something with Bill Clinton in short shorts or something. I don't know.
There's a lot to work with
There's
from
a lot,
the
yeah.
Arkansas days of the Southwest Conference. Like there's a lot of logos that they can use, and I know they are. So definitely be saving your money, because season 4 is definitely coming. And talk about some heavy hitters coming up. I think everybody will be very pleased at some of the schools in the lineup coming up after Arkansas as well.
Yeah, let me just say this before, I don't want to get Connor to come revoke our sponsorship, because please God, we need this money. But if you know me at all and know where I'm from and know places where I have had a rooting interest before, you can just say, Matt, I think, expects to be happy this season. So if you're trying to figure out what you should be doing with money, and maybe that's a hint, or some other schools that could potentially join the home field lineup. And that the schools that join the home field lineup could also include your school. If you are tired of Arkansas and Air Force and Maryland and Indiana and Purdue getting all the limelight, if I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. I'm sick and tired of Indiana dominating the spotlight. There's no reason why your stuff can't be on here too. If Mr. Athletic Director or Miss Licensing Director or Lord of Campus IP who's listening to this, my email, matt@extrapointsmb.com. I will get you in touch with people at Home Field. And if you haven't bought Home Field stuff yet, use promo code EXTRAPOINTS. All one word. Save 15% off that first order. Last quick note here before we get into everything else. If you would like us to shill for your stuff with the same reckless abandon and enthusiasm that we do for comfortable t-shirts and comfortable sweatpants, we have podcast sponsorship deals available at very affordable rates and ad inventory starting at the end of May, leading into the summer for Extra Points, which reaches over 10,000 people every single free newsletter we send, including many of the captains of the collegiate sports industry, your favorite beat writers, and hordes of nerd fans. So if you want to reach out to those people, that email is sales@extrapointsmb.com. Maybe I can use money from that to buy a better door so my kids don't come into my office like they've done twice during this recording. I know that we were kind of joking before we did this, that like we don't want to do another NIL episode, but we kind of had to talk about NIL here for 20 minutes. But Bryan, there's been a change in my life that you, I think, are uniquely positioned to talk about, which can maybe steer us out of this NIL collective ditch into maybe a funnier way for rich people to waste a whole lot of money.
Yeah, that would be F1, and welcome to the fold. Being a newly crowned F1 fan, I'm kind of sad that it took us going all the way to Miami for the tour to kind of get you involved. But I guess time zone wise, that definitely would be a little bit better for you. And look, yeah. I think this is everybody. It's funny because I was actually talking with some ADs about just kind of like the F1 boom and like what they kind of took away from not only the whole Drive to Survive impact, but just kind of how the sport is growing. In America. I mean, when you look at the TV ratings, we're off to a record start. I think it was the second most watched F1 race ever, in American history for television. So, it definitely is picking up steam. And from a marketing standpoint, I think there is a lot to learn for a lot of schools out there. Whether it's how they market their kind of personalities, how they certainly get sponsorships. I think there's really a burgeoning industry in terms of surrounding that around F1. And I think it's just a very unique sport that a lot of people are getting much more interested in. And I think that's something that the college athletics leaders, as they look to kind of grow their pie, especially, nowadays when they're locked into all these long-term rights agreements, they can learn a few lessons from F1. But I would be curious to see what your first race experience was over the weekend there with the Miami Grand Prix.
Yeah, I have to admit, like, I was torn about whether I wanted to get on this bandwagon. And part of it, and this is also, I think, even relevant for people in the industry, like I am 35 and sports is my job. And I try to maintain interests independent of sports and probably watch less non-college sports now than I did at any other time in my life. Because like if me sitting down here watching a hockey game can feel a little bit like work. And so I'm always a little bit hesitant about like, am I going to jump into this other thing? It's a big time commitment. I am not unfamiliar with motorsports. I grew up not that far from the Mid-Ohio racetrack in Ohio, where people would race on the weekends. That's more informal. My dad weirdly enough, was like a really big NASCAR fan. And I say that because like my dad studied art at Yale for a while and went to Cal Arts and is, I think, generally not considered part of the typical NASCAR demographic, but he loved tuning in to cuss at Jeff Gordon. So like, okay, like that was, and Brazilians are really into F1. and so like, all of these things that I knew here, but also many of the things that I don't love about college sports or feel kind of uneasy about with sports in general also seem to be like turned up to like 11 within the F1 world, right? I feel like maybe I'm a little bit uncomfortable with like rampant corporate and just throwing money at stuff here from third-party interests within college athletics. Well, brother, like that seems to be what F1 kind of is, right? The race schedule is kind of like a who's who of problematic despots and and maybe cities where we don't want to be doing sports washing or anything. So I'm like, I don't know, but it did activate a part of my lizard brain, which is cars go fast. And what is one of the very first toys that we play with when we're babies? It's cars. We like to see things go fast and make loud noises. And I will also say the Netflix documentary series worked like a charm for me because that humanized and provided context to the actual people involved in this. And I haven't watched all 4 seasons of it. I'm kind of chipping away at it in a way that I don't think I would have gotten from the actual broadcast. Because it seems to me like what makes this fun isn't just cars go fast, but you pick a couple of these drivers who you've decided are now mortal enemies or now like blood brothers, and you want to just to scream at them that way. And that's cool. And that is something I think maybe college athletics hasn't done historically a very good job of really humanizing the players. The dominant figures in college sports, I think, historically have been coaches or the institution itself rather than the players, because the players are gone pretty quickly, and SIDs and schools that try to put walls. Like that kind of all access documentary over that length of time wouldn't have been done with Ohio State football. Like even like the college version of Hard Knocks are still really pretty sanitized. But maybe that's something to change, especially if you were like, if I was somebody trying to grow interest in like college lacrosse or college hockey or college softball, I would be trying to figure out how do I work with ESPN Plus or the SEC network or somebody to build something equivalent for Oklahoma softball. Like that to me seems like a pretty good business. But what do I know, man? I'm a dumb blogger, but like that seems like good business sense to me, right?
Well, I mean, a lot of schools already kind of do versions of that, right? They've had the kind of behind the scenes look, but you're right, the sanitized nature of it, it really is just kind of showing the highlights and really focusing a lot on the results, right? We're not really going to class with a lot of these athletes. We're not showing how difficult it is for them on a day-to-day basis, right? To handle work-life balance, I guess, if you could say it, put it that way. I mean, look,
I would
practicing.
This is work. Yeah.
It definitely, you're practicing, you're up in the morning, you're lifting weights. A lot of the athletes, especially in the non-football men's basketball type of, they've got a second job, that they've got to go to at night, or maybe they're in the libraries, running study hall or something like that to help out with the bills. You have obviously the added pressures of studying for tests, writing papers. I know just thinking back to those days, it was always difficult to get it done. And I didn't have the athlete load, right? And so I think a lot of people can relate to that, but they typically do not end up showing that aspect if you're going to do some of these behind the scenes series, at least at the college level. I mean, we've seen Showtime did one a couple of years ago. They followed Notre Dame, they followed Navy, a couple others, Florida State, I believe. The Drive at Pac-12 Networks has followed a couple schools during the season as well, and kind of tried to provide those behind the scenes glimpses. But you're right, the thing that the Netflix show does so well is highlight those personalities and the personality conflicts, that emerge out of the competition. And frankly, that's something that a lot of sports are trying to replicate. They're trying to already do that with golf and tennis, and try to do basically that version of Drive to Survive for those sports at the professional level. And look,
yeah, I'm going to stop you right there real quick. I'm going to make an executive decision. I'm not promoting the golf one. Who's making the golf one. They're not getting PR on this show. Like maybe it's great, I don't know, but like that's a Vox Media production. They know what they did.
I will avoid watching the golf one.
You listen, you can watch it. Anyone else, feel free to watch. I'm just saying, I'm not going to promote it on here. Like, sorry, Chad.
Understandable. And look, the thing though is it's all about how can we grow interest in our sport. And I think there are a lot of interesting things too that you can take away from the fact that F1. Look, this was used to be Bernie Ecclestone's like baby. That it was very much a mom and pop kind of organization that was running these F1 races around the world. And they got bought by Liberty Media, which is a big rights player here in the United States. They obviously own the Braves and other entities, and so they've brought a much more kind of Americanized media version of F1 and really kind of transformed things in not only just the races and bring them to spots like Miami and Las Vegas and Austin already here in the United States, but really have tried to dial up the interest worldwide, and it's certainly working. It's not just a growing sport in America. I mean, this is something that I go back, when I lived overseas as a kid. You used to see the Ferrari shop, you used to see the interest in people like Mick Schumacher, you used to see the massive crowds that would go to places, in Italy and in the UK. And you have these terrific, historic racing organizations like Williams and Mercedes and McLaren that would, have really brand loyalty, across the globe. And, taking it from that to, where it is nowadays, increasing the social media presence of F1 tremendously over the last couple of years. I mean, this is, really had some thought to it. And I think if college athletics leaders kind of look at the broader picture, they can take away a few of the lessons learned from this. I know everybody wants to do that and start growing, but at the end of the day, you also have to have a focus on the personalities, because that is not only the lifeblood of your sport, but it's also what, really can bring that human connection to something that, let's face it, a lot of fans, they're not going to be going 200 miles an hour at any point in their lives. So how can you make that connection to somebody in that car wearing a big helmet that you really only kind of see as a big logo on the side? So it's going to be unique, I think, for college athletic leaders to maybe take a few lessons from this and apply it to what they are doing, especially as these new media rights deals are coming up, and they can maybe have some flexibility in terms of doing what they need to grow the sport.
Those are all great points. One of the geniuses I think about the show wasn't just that it showed the personality of the athlete, and it showed you the driver in situations independent of driving the car. It showed you around their house or in their community how other people treated them, but it also showed how they fit in with the entire enterprise. Right? Like, I would not know what a director of an F1 racing team does. I would not know about mechanic drama. I would not know about how any of these pieces fit together. Like, y'all, I drive a Kia. Like, I could not be less of a Ferrari guy and know how this world works unless you took me by the hand and showed me. And part of the impetus for this program and for Extra Points and why our entire company exists is because we think every single part of this operation matters and is interesting, from the quarterback to the softball player, to the dobo, to the person who's working with Learfield, to the athletic director, to all these different component parts. And I watched several of the behind the scenes stuff that's done here too. And like the breakout stars, well, part of what makes like Hard Knocks interesting, or when it was interesting, now I think it's kind of hit or miss. It would be sometimes even the people that aren't actually on the football team. Right. Like, I think of like the Cleveland Browns coach who looked like he was 400 pounds and talking about how nobody stretched before they like stormed the beaches of Normandy, and like these other characters that you wouldn't get to know. Every football team has weirdos like that. Every locker room, every administrative building. I understand that we are not dealing with F1 money or have the same, or can get something on Netflix the same way. But I think they did that really well, and you kind of really have to baby people to get them into a sport that they might not otherwise. Because not a lot of Americans, like their dad and their dad watched F1, and then I don't even know how you would have heard of Williams necessarily in this country unless you're a gearhead, or maybe I'm just being unsophisticated. But the fact that they've been able to do this has been great, which makes me think there may be ways to do it for other sports.
And what will be truly interesting to see is just, can it be sustained, and can this keep going? Because you mentioned that this country has had its fascination not only with kind of that car culture, but look, the Indianapolis 500 is always one of the most watched races in the country every single year. You have NASCAR, which is really popular maybe 10-15 years ago, and it's obviously come down to the pack, but still, even this weekend the NASCAR race outrated the F1 race. So there's still a lot of interest in NASCAR, a lot of sponsorship money, a lot of sponsorship dollars, some unique, I think, factors into various racing entities. But I think for a lot of folks, that's kind of like college football now. You know what? The Pac-12 is vastly different from the SEC from a perspective. Yeah, that they're kind of similar in terms of they're playing college football, and the down markers are still the same. But in terms of how they play, in terms of how they run their programs, in terms of the philosophy surrounding their programs, that's different as well. And so I think it's that kind of unique blend that people can attach onto that I think does make for interesting parallels with college athletics and college football in particular. And it'll be interesting to see kind of what the F1 effect will have, because I think it's not just college athletics. The NFL is looking at this, the NBA is looking at this. What can they take from what is happening with this, especially with the younger demographics to use in their sports, because everybody wants to grow. There is that drumbeat for growth, not just from investors, not just from owners that want to make more money, but also in the case of college athletics, from universities that want to get their brands out there even more so than it is right now.
Yeah. The last thing I think I'll mention about F1 that may just be something to think about. I love college football. That is my number one sport with the bullet. I plan my schedule around it. A college football broadcast routinely exceeds 3.5 hours. Like, it's a big deal. People have tried to use this as the primary pitch for selling me on soccer, and I really get this appeal. And this is kind of a nice thing about F1. The events don't take 4 hours. A race, if the weather's good, is 2, right? Like maybe a little bit more than that if you watch some of the pre-gaming. A soccer match certainly doesn't take that long either. In a world where attention spans have been shot to hell and people are looking for ways to engage with content without having to make the same kind of gigantic time commitment, or ways to engage with it on their phones or in video games or with fantasy or with other ways besides the broadcast, having a shorter broadcast seems like it would be a real asset.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I think that, truthfully, the NCAA, the player, rules oversight and everybody's kind of involved in creating rules, have identified game time as a big issue. Look, the networks themselves would love a more compact product so they can have more ad breaks and they can sell things, and they can have studio shows that make a lot of money that they don't really have to spend a whole lot on in between games. Like there's a lot of emphasis, I think, in the game right now, from the NFL level to the college football level and beyond, to kind of make sure that things are not only more compact, but like you're saying, focus more towards the demographics that are consuming them. And we'll see if even more drastic changes. We've seen a few rule changes that will go into effect for the 2022 season. We'll see. I know there's been a lot of talk about making sure that the clocks run and not stop on the first down, very similar to the NFL, except for like the last 2 minutes of things. And maybe we'll get there. I'm just not sure in terms of how much time are we actually going to end up saving that'll make a huge difference. Because look, a lot of the thing about college football, that the reason for a lot of those games, a lot of it is the pageantry, and showing those crowd shots, making sure there's time between to focus on that backup right tackle who's thrown into the fire. And, as nice as it is to have those kind of clean 2-hour windows and things like soccer, it's going to be difficult to kind of bring college football in particular all the way back to that. But we'll see kind of going forward.
Yeah. I again, to kind of put a bow on all of this here, my deeply researched and passionate take is, I don't know. I can look at this and think, yeah, there's some things to learn. And also, like, I'm also not going to sit here and say, like, I'm definitely going to be deeply invested in this sport for the next 6 years. I don't know. Do I plan on watching the next race, which is in Monaco, right? Like, and yeah, if I can, I will. I haven't figured out exactly. There's no Brazilian. And I haven't figured out exactly who I want to ride or die for. The cool thing about this is I know something bad's going to happen to like obnoxiously rich people. And some of them will like, oh no, the Aston Martin people are unhappy. Like it's hard for me to like get mad about that kind of thing. Well, I recognize it. Yeah. I mean,
it's interesting too, because like, there has been a lot of focus on Americanizing the sport. And like, there's been talk about the Andretti's entering and some others coming in. And there was always the great hope that there would be an American driver in F1 that can really kind of take the sport to the next level. And we'll see if there's anybody. I don't know if there's really anybody kind of coming up through the pipelines that would be interesting, but you look at like Zhou Guan Yu, is involved. He's the first Chinese driver. And obviously there's a bit of a marketing component to that as well. You would get interest from his home country. And, there are there was things, going back last year with Nikita Mazepin and Russia, getting into that kind of market. So there is always a global kind of perspective with a lot of these things. But you're right. There's no Brazilian, but I think the Americanization of the sport is definitely here and here to stay. And part of that is because they're owned by a company based kind of out on the outskirts of Denver. So that obviously is kind of prominent for them. But I think there are just again a ton of lessons and I'd be curious too, like if we had to have like the drive to survive for college football or even just college athletics, I think it'd be interesting to like have drive to survive about Oklahoma softball this year. Like they're going on this historic run. It would be cool to kind of go behind the scenes to
they're demolishing people.
Yeah.
I would love to be in a locker room to hear, hey, how do you stay motivated after like beating people, like, run ruling them 2 weeks in a row? And what are you, like 40-1 or whatever? Like, yeah, that sounds like compelling television to me. But
I mean, the Big Ten hockey, right? A very unique sport, like a lot of programs that have kind of come out of nowhere to really have a lot of success. They've had, fancy new arenas. Michigan was in the Frozen Four recently. So it's like maybe following a Big Ten program like that would be kind of cool on the college hockey scene. Lacrosse, beach volleyball. We've seen a lot of these emerging sports. We already talked about men's soccer and some of the changes coming to that. Like it would be fun to kind of get truly behind the scenes and focus not just on the personalities, but like what is happening day to day for those athletes. And hopefully some of the schools are taking some of these ideas and saying, we should have that. And let's invest in that content to showcase our student athletes. It's going to help them. It's going to help them with NIL deals. It's going to help them with going down the road to be spotlighted and be tied into this university and this fan base and hopefully grow and create some more fans down the road as well.
Friends, if all of you listening, subscribe to Extra Points. Will we have enough money to start an F1 team? No. Will we have enough money to bankroll some interesting behind the scenes documentaries at the Division I level? No. Would we have enough money to maybe bully somebody else into thinking about doing that? Maybe. There's only one way to find out, and that's by subscribing, which you can do for just $8 a month, or if you are a college student, graduate or undergrad, for just $4 a month at extrapointsmb.com, so you can make sure that you get everything. Speaking of emerging sports, I don't know if this is going to be in the show notes or not. I did have a chance to talk to somebody involved in acrobatics and tumbling, which is a sport that is in the process of leaving the emerging sport category to potentially becoming an NCAA sanctioned sport. Enough institutions are sponsoring it now where they can apply for that championship format. I had a chance to talk to people about why that sport is growing and how they're able to continue to grow that. There's a couple other emerging sports in that category too. You can listen to that for free at Collegiate Sports Connect, where Bryan has also been producing a lot of other engaging and interesting new videos about people in this space. Last thing, I think I would be remiss if I didn't promote this. If you like this podcast, would you please tell people it's pretty good? Give us some 5 stars on your various hosting platforms so the algorithm bumps us up. Also, I don't know, leave a comment on YouTube, retweet it on Twitter, tell your colleagues in the office, because quite frankly, I know a bunch of you in the office are reading the D1 Ticker. You're probably reading Extra Points. Maybe say, hey, maybe give these 2 schmucks a try on your drive home. Boost those download numbers, which then helps us bring in other sponsors, which we can then use to launder to create documentaries and or racing teams. We might have to start with like sponsoring dirt bikes in like West Virginia, but maybe we can move up to the big fast cars. Who knows?
Jump into the karting world. We'll go from there. World, Vegas. Yeah.
The point is, give us some of your money so we can invest it in a speculative sporting enterprise, which is the most college football thing I think we could possibly do. Everyone, thanks for listening. We'll catch up with you later this week.